Welcome back. It's reassuring to know that a wise person, someone that's liberated, is not someone that has no desires whatsoever. They, according to verse 55, it says that even though it says that the wise person gives up all desires, sarvan, kaman sarvan, that means all desires, then it's very easy to take that literally and take it hard onto yourself because you compare yourself to this wise person and you say that this is impossible. It's almost like they're living at a totally different world and you're just trying to make your way, you're living and so on. And you find yourself having desires to listen, desires to grow, desires to make something of yourself, desire to reconcile differences, desire to learn, desire for moksha. These are all wonderful desires. So it doesn't stand to reason that they are also given up. So specifically, verse 55 wants to remind us that desires are completely normal, they are useful, and they are what makes you who you are today. Everything you are today is because you went out into the world, you had a desire to save the dog, which gives you some, punyam. You had a desire to go and meet someone. You had a desire to have children, and children changed your life. Your job changed your life. So we have to firstly just have a gentle, clean, healthy relationship with desires. And this is so crucial so that you can be okay with yourself, because we don't want a person walking around thinking, I shouldn't have desires to meet people. I shouldn't have desires to, improve my mind. I shouldn't have desires to be in a relationship. I shouldn't have desires to, because it's all just, just a play of names and forms. So we're not trying to be an armchair philosopher here. You're just being a normal, down-to-earth person, and you're doing what has to be done, even though cognitively you understand that, the whole play is of names and forms, but through and through all of that, the real I, awareness, completely, pure and untainted by the goings, the happenings of this person. So this is a vision of the wise person. Throughout their desires, they understand this is not my desire. This is a desire of Andre, a person who is a product of many lifetimes. And we can be okay with that. So in that sense, you have this nice relationship between letting this person do their thing, because it's conditioned to do things. It's like, your PC, I can see your PC, your laptop. I see your laptop, nice keys, and you got a screen. But also behind that laptop, that instrument, there is a software, and that software is your mind. And so the software is a product of so much programming and conditioning that's taken place. And that's caused you, this person, to have certain ideas about the world and what needs to be done and not done. So this is totally fine. And you don't need to, sort of attack that, because it's not your design. You didn't design this laptop of yours, this physical body and this software, this subtle body. You didn't design that. Now, if you didn't design that, then how can you now say that, I have to sort of just eliminate things? It's not yours to begin with. It is not yours to begin with. Therefore, the wise person can be okay with their desires flourishing in this world. And then we said, even though healthy desires are to be given up, and that is the mark of a wise person, why is it that we have a hard time giving up unhealthy desires? Even though we know rationally that it's not that of a, it's not going to serve me very well at all, and it's going to maybe bring a much harder life down the road if you continue. Or it's not making you, never mind the future, it's just not making you in the present. It's not making you proud to be who you are, right? There's sort of some little bit of shame, or you feel that you're not as worthy. And all of this is caused by this inability to focus on what is to be done. Instead, your mind once in a while goes onto, right, those unhealthy habits or desires. Now, the reason for that is manifold. The first one we said is that you look at that object in a way that is glorifying. You're glorifying that object, that it doesn't really have any real glory in it. It's a great object. It's helpful. I get it. But you're looking at that object of yours, whatever it is, food or entertainment or whatever it is, having more value than it really does. So what we have to do is just pause for a moment and have a little self-reflection in our minds and see, what is the real value? Does this object have any real objective value that I'm giving it? You just have a little conversation to yourself. You're not rejecting the object. You're just seeing the object in a new light. The second is that we said, when it comes to temptation, or you see the immediate rewards, then the way that we're designed is our rationality tends to get clouded. And we tend to participate, right, impulsively for what is not to be done sometimes. And the way to, according to the book, The Willpower Instinct, the way to help yourself with this is twofold. If you are, suppose, at home, okay, at a common familiar workplace, at home or at work or in the society, in a social setting, and someone offers you a drink, and you know, I don't want to have a second drink, or I don't want to have one more of whatever it is. I had one chocolate, I don't want to have another chocolate. Then, according to the book, what you can do is immediately take a deep breath and you train your mind to do just that. So the moment I want to second, I take a little deep breath. No one has to see you. And what you do through this is you slow down that dopamine release in the anticipation of getting that fancy object. This is something that's very easy and quick to do. So therefore, you take a deep breath, and that is your strategy to just pause and bring that rationality back into your psyche. The second we said is that you wait. Suppose you want to do something right now, and it just arises. That's how these desires, unhealthy desires, come. They just arise out of nowhere. They just, something triggers them, environment triggers, you see something, and you get triggered. So suppose you're sitting down and you get triggered. Something, maybe you saw something. So the moment that trigger happens and it compels you to do whatever it is you're about to do, then stand up, according to the book, and set a timer 5 minutes. Now, during those, and then walk away from that environment, just whatever, close by. Now, during those 5 minutes, what you do is you reward yourself. So, for example, I will stand up and I'll eat that little chocolate, white milk chocolate. And that trains your brain that those 5 minutes are really worth it. Now you're telling your brain, I'm not just going to stay 5 minutes and suffer. I'm going 5 minutes to do something, to get a reward. So that way, that reward overrides that desire of yours that is unhealthy. So like this, you do this several times, and it already rewires your brain to have a different relationship towards that desire. So this is 2 solutions to managing your unhealthy desires. One of them is to take a deep breath, and the second is to give 5 minutes timeout and reward yourself during those 5 minutes, and then come back and see what relationship you will have to that same object now. You'll be quite surprised how the entire narrative has now shifted towards that whole, it's a good idea, here's why you should have it, here's why it's healthy for you, because that's how desires work. They always convince you it is something that you need, it is healthy for you, and why can I not just spoil myself once in a while? And it's just I'm doing all the hard work, and why do I have to constantly do the hard work? I can just let go one time. So it's a very convincing voice that a desire, unhealthy desire, gives you. So therefore, this 5 minutes rewires that entire process. Try it. If you will, you're invited to try it. You're not being told to. I dare you to try it and see what happens. Actually, let me use reverse psychology. Don't try it. Okay, I don't want anyone to try this. Forget about everything I said. Okay, now, so verse 55 talked about relationship of a wise person to desires. That means they don't give all desires up, only unhealthy desires. Then the next question arises is that what is wise person's relationship to emotions? Because once again, we can say the same thing with emotions, just like how we're told usually the wise person gives up all desires. The same thing will be said in verse 56, at least implied. The wise person is totally free, equanimous, free of all emotions. And then you can make the same mistake and say, oh, I shouldn't feel angry, I shouldn't feel disappointed because I'm not wise. Well, that is not the case. So let's see what verse 56 says about emotions. Verse 56, Dukeshu manudvignamanaha, Sukeshu vigata sprahaha, Vitaraga bhaya krodhaha, Stitadhir munir uchyate.
The one who is not affected by adversities, who is without yearning for pleasures, and is free from longing, fear, and anger, is said to be the wise person whose knowledge stays unshaken.
So again, it's the same thing. The one who is without yearning for pleasure. So again, you can mistake this as an absolute, who is free from longing, all sorts of longing. Again, you can see how these verses can become quite literal if we're not, if we don't bring the nuances. So obviously, the wise person does have, according to the verse, 4 major emotions. So it's not a matter that they don't have, it's just that how does this wise person deal with sadness, longing, anger, and the first one is dukkha, which is sorrow or sadness. So what happens when, or can sorrow or sadness arise for asthita prajna? The answer is yes. But then the question is, what is the purpose of sorrow and of sadness? Well, sorrow is, you can't get rid of it entirely, and you never will, because it is like all of the 4 other. It is an indicator that something that you loved has now been taken away from you. In fact, sorrow most of the time, for example, if my parents, something happens to my parent and they're, they pass away, I will have a tear. I'll be shedding tears. You won't. That means I will have sorrow. Why? Because I love my mom. So this means that sorrow is also connected to love. Your sense of love towards something, the loss of that object brings about sorrow to you. So again, you cannot say now that sorrow is a bad. It's a response telling you that you have a human heart, thank God. And thereby, even a saint is not indifferent to certain things that are inducing sorrow, because the saint has a human heart. So again, you can't say categorically that a wise person is totally free of sorrow. You can't say you're crying, therefore you're not wise. I heard this before. As a teacher, I've heard this before. That's how people think, literally. No, sorrow, like any other, is either healthy or unhealthy. What is healthy sorrow? It is where you're able to, despite shedding a tear, you quickly bounce back. Rather than ruminating on it and creating stories, you quickly, we call this titiksha, resilience. You quickly, bounce back. Something happens to someone, you lose someone, and you understand this is the process of life. Everyone has to go eventually, right? So you're not lying to yourself. You're just kind of going through, you're bringing the knowledge in that moment and coming to see that, hey, okay, now this is gone. What's next? What now? What is the next step? So in that sense, you quickly rise back to your 2 feet and you're able to continue life. You're not too greatly affected for too long about something. Whereas unhealthy sorrow is where you're unable to pull yourself up. So something happens and it turns the narrative into depression. So the way that depression happens, in fact, all depression, more or less, what happens is one thought arises. And due to the associative power of the mind, that thought brings another related thought onto itself. So we say, now they're gone, therefore I will never again find someone like them. Therefore I am alone. Therefore now I'm going to be just bored. Therefore there's nothing else to, worthy of living for. And there's no one as good as they are. And, the world has changed. And because it's changed, no one really cares. And I'm not worthy of being cared for. And no one really knows how to care anymore. So what started out as a single innocent thought has now, due to the associations, brought more negative thoughts. And that totality is what we call depression. And it's very hard to pull oneself out of depression because depression is not an overnight happening. It has taken place for months. A buildup of months cannot be negated with a single statement. So now when someone comes, suppose, up to you and they're in a depressed mode and they want help, if you can't help them, don't be surprised, because depression is a product of buildup of many, many, many thoughts that have now taken so firm root that they are as though a new reality for that person or for whoever it is. Therefore, unhealthy form of sorrow is where you start to, not deliberately, but usually unconsciously or through negligence, add unrelated thoughts to the point where it builds a narrative, and that narrative becomes sorrowful narrative. That's unhealthy sorrow. So now, look at this. The wise person has sorrow. What kind of sorrow? Healthy or unhealthy? Healthy sorrow, okay? Next is sukha, happiness. So sukha, see, initially, like, why are we talking about happiness? We don't need to. Everyone wants happiness. How can this be a problem? Well, like anything, it can become a problem when you become so sort of happy that you lose sensitivity to your environment. And it sort of becomes borderline dismissal of the environment around you. I think I've had one time a situation, not that I think, but I remember, and I'm going to intentionally be ambiguous so I don't bring out the details, where someone was at a retreat, not my retreat, and they were so happy, and I knew them. They were so happy. They knew me. That's how they, came up to my teacher. But they came to the retreat and they were so happy. They made me very uncomfortable because I couldn't sort of connect, to this person. They were just it's a new place and it's new people and a new environment and new teachers and new tradition. And so I was like almost, repulsed by how happy this person was. Now, what happens is when there's excess happiness, what happens is it gets followed by a downfall. And so what happened was very interesting. A couple of days later, after 4 days of intense happiness from this person, there was this complete sort of drop in their disposition. And it became borderline nothing to say, just serious, just sort of this, kind of a person that, again, I felt uncomfortable now because this time they were too happy. Now they've got nothing to say. So it was very awkward. So we can see even happiness can go out of balance if it's not smart or intelligent happiness. Now, what is intelligent happiness? It is where you are able to be, or what is healthy happiness? It's where you're happy for somebody else's happiness. That means you see someone happy and it innocently induces happiness in you. That's healthy happiness. Healthy happiness is also where you go out of your way to make other people happy because you're coming out of fullness rather than looking for fulfillment. You're fulfilled. You're like a glass that's pouring, and that glass pouring wants to reach out innocently and give happiness, providing whatever shape or form to other people. This is happy or healthy happiness. Can you say that the wise person doesn't have healthy happiness? Of course they have healthy happiness. Do they have unhealthy happiness where it becomes so overblown that you lose sensitivity of your environment? and it becomes a form of jealousy. That means something bad happens to someone, to my enemy or whoever they are, and then you're happy because of that. Or when COVID was in our life, and there was a grandma, I told the story before, who was at home all the time, and she was unable to go out because she's old, and now she saw everyone else unable to go out just like her, and she took great happiness in this because oh, we're all equal now. See, this is happiness, but we would call this tamasic happiness, unhealthy happiness. So thereby, happiness is also to be managed um, properly. Then it's problematic happiness, where it's arising out of seeing somebody else hurt, and then it makes you sort of, I'm higher than them. I'm so lucky to be here. I've got this knowledge, and I've got Vedanta, and they're still in this nonsense, half-cooked spirituality. So you have to be careful that you're not doing this using others, journey. They're yet to get to where you are, and using that as a form of making yourself like a happy person. Okay. Then we got bhaya, fear. So fear, like anything, is empirical. It is a indicator that you need to protect yourself, to act rationally, because if you didn't have fear, you would not act rationally. So there has to be some mechanism to let you know that I have to do the right thing. I have to think so that I don't get hurt. I have to reduce my impulsivities so that I don't get hurt. Therefore, bhaya, or fear, is a preservation mechanism. Now, can you say that the wise person doesn't have healthy fear, such as stepping on the road and there's an elephant running? Or why would you have an elephant on the road? You would have cars or horses running or driving. Of course, you're going to step back. So this is a healthy fear. You have to preserve your life. If you're sitting down meditating and you have insects coming and a snake is coming, naturally you will have fear to, back off a little bit. However, there is also unhealthy fear. What is unhealthy fear? Wondering whether to answer or not. Is sorrow a vasana? Again, sorrow is, as I said, it's empirical sorrow, but there is also subjective sorrow. Subjective sorrow is when you add your own narratives. Empirical sorrow is not a vasana, it is an order. It is an order just like dharma. It is an indicator, it's an expression of your care for something. Okay. Now, getting back to fear, what is unhealthy fear? Well, Michael, you want to say?
Anxiety would be an example of unhealthy fear,
Okay.
where it's
Good.
prolonged and unrational.
All right. Now, what is anxiety? What are you doing during anxiety, Lorena?
I just thought throwing someone else under the bus to save yourself would be an unhealthy fear, like at the expense of someone else's safety, or so that they take the blame instead of yourself. That's an unhealthy fear.
Absolutely. Okay, good. Vijay? What's
imagining about something that's not happened and having a fear of that.
Okay.
Imagining something will go wrong and
right. Okay. So good. So we call it, okay, Bhuvana?
The fear of the future, what's going to happen, or fear of the past, or bringing some things from the past and worrying about it, or having some fear about it.
Good. I'll tie in this with Vijay also. And Pankaj?
I think if the fear is out of proportion to the threat, then it is unhealthy.
Good. So it's out of proportion. So it's almost like giving, it's actually very similar to what Vijay and Bhuvana said. And in psychology, we call this catastrophizing, where you are creating a narrative or an image in your mind of this being completely overblown. So you're creating a worst case scenario that is unrealistic, and it is mostly your own creation. It's not really keeping with the facts. So in that sense, it becomes very stifling, and you're unable to move past that. Now, the way to deal with this kind of catastrophizing, where you imagine or it's out of proportion, or you're throwing someone else under the bus to save yourself, this is all coming out of those projections, is to acknowledge first, I have absolutely every potential to resolve this right now. I can overcome this. I'm an adult and I have the capacity to work this out. Nothing's going to happen to me. And whatever happens to me, I have the capacity to work it out. This is a fact. So first thing you have to acknowledge, now I'm an adult. As a child, maybe this was justifiable, more or less. Now as an adult, I have the potential, every tool under my belt to work this out. That is a fact, if you think about it. It's a fact. You do have the capacity to sort whatever is to come. Whatever is to come, you will have the ability to work through it. You will have the ability to pause and ask Sandra to say something.
I heard before, I read it. I don't want to bring the name of this person, this speaker. Is fear is a sensation married to a thought, an unhealthy thought,
Yeah.
which will produce a sensation in your body.
Yeah. Unhealthy thoughts produces a sensation. That's very true. It produces, it releases, excess cholesterol. It releases, chemicals out of proportion, and you feel it in your body, and thereby you're unable to act, or breathing becomes hard, the chest becomes tight. So there's a physiological, the throat contracts, so it becomes very hard to speak. So all of this originated from that initial thought that was somehow planted. Yeah. So that's true. It's a physiological response, and the cause of it was a thought. Now, what I'm talking about is what's the solution to this? And we said, firstly, it is to acknowledge that I have the capacity to find a solution. You have to say that to yourself, because we're not taught to think like this. What happens is the mind tends to sort of, ruminate on the thought, complain about the thought or the fear, and it's not really removing it, because ultimately what you want to do is you want to remove this uncomfortable thought that's producing the sensation. Now, the second thing is you have to, or not that you have to, but you can ask yourself, and this comes from business. It's very interesting. See, when something fearful comes into your life, we often forget what is our strengths in that moment. We forget what are our weaknesses. We forget what are our opportunities in this moment, and what are the real threats in this moment. So this in business we call SWOT, SWOT analysis. So suppose something is happening that you are, worried, right? And it's related to you or someone that's close to you. So the first thing you say is, okay, in this situation, what are my strengths? Because you have to bring out your strengths. If you don't, then the fear, right, then it becomes a big thing to work through. So you say things like, well, I'm a good communicator. I can stand up for what is to be done. I don't get easily run over by, flimsy thoughts or flimsy, rationale. I can certainly, look up online and do some little research to get a little bit knowledgeable about this area. That is my strength. What are my weaknesses? This is important, because if you don't know your weaknesses, then they end up being your fallbacks. You fall back because of your weaknesses. So you say something like, well, my weakness is I am, suppose, not good at confrontation. So suppose you say that. So now you think, now what is my strength then? Well, the way that I resolve is through perhaps a phone or an email. So let me rather resort to a way that is stronger for me rather than subscribing to my weaknesses. Or suppose your weakness is you need some backup, right? You need some knowledge to make a good argument. So unless you have knowledge, unless you have some information regarding the matter, you're probably going to lose on the the whole situation is going to kind of, cloud you, push you down. So what you do, knowing what your weaknesses are, you then go online or whatever it is, and you research about the situation. You get to know what other people have said, what other people have experienced, and you get educated. So now you're negating your weaknesses and then your opportunities. You see, if something unpleasant arrives in your life and you don't see the opportunities, it becomes just one more experience that has to be sort of pushed aside so you can move on with your life. Everything that happens carries an opportunity with it. So now the question is, what is the opportunity in this situation? What can I learn? What is it teaching me about how I respond? How much is it triggering me? Am I capable of bringing this knowledge of the Gita into this situation? Where do I shut down? Where do I experience contraction in my body? And finally, what are the threats? Threats is, what are the potential obstacles that you are facing in the situation? This is where you're actually getting down to what are the actual obstacles or potential obstacles that I may encounter during the situation, and make sure that you are clear about them. So let's say it's, first obstacle is, the alimony of children, so she will take the children away and, I won't get any time with them. So that's a potential obstacle. Obstacle number 2, half of my money is going to get taken away or whatever it is, right? That's an obstacle. So you're getting a little reality check. And then based on those obstacles, then you can work out, based on your strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities, how do you want to now incorporate that? How do you want to deal with the situation? So this is called the SWOT analysis, where you're taking a situation and you're doing a quick analysis, getting to know your strengths, your potential downfalls or your weaknesses, opportunities, learning and insights, and what are the actual threats in the situation. Now, the next verse will deal with how does it would say that the wise person deals with situations through universal values rather than through personal pressures. That means when a wise person acts, their frame of acting is through the lens of dharma rather than personal pressures. But before I do that, why is it incorrect to say that a wise person is completely free from emotions such as anger, sorrow, longing?
I feel there's a connection between the emotion that you are facing, that is the unpleasant emotion, with these vices like anger. Like for example, we are talking of a situation like, there's a, divorce, and there's going to be, some parting of wealth and this and that.
Yeah.
Even if a person is capable of, doing, giving part of the wealth or sharing time with children or things like that, the cause of the problem most of the time is the involved ego, that how could she do this to me?
Okay. Yeah.
That anger, the capability to bear the loss is there, but the anger and the ego doesn't permit it. So if you are wise person, the situation per se, the experiential situation that is going to come your way might not bother you as much, but the emotion that you're feeling, that with the ego involved. So that's what I feel.
Okay. And also, it's a good point you mentioned. See, even anger, anger, did I talk about anger? I said that, okay, there's one more thing that I want to say before we go on. So we talked about fear and then anger. See, anger, just like Gautam said, anger is another indicator that something needs to change. That means there's some unprocessed pain in the mind about something, but also anger can mean your sense of justice towards something. So if you and I saw someone getting innocently hurt or bullied, you would experience anger. So would I. So this means that anger, you can't say that anger is your own personal stuff. That's your own personal conditioning. You should be totally equanimous and just watch that, event going on, have no response. That's wrong. Anger is a natural indicator of your sense of justice towards a hurtful cause. Second of all, anger is also an indicator of some unprocessed emotion or unprocessed story that you have not released from your life. So suppose as Gautam said, some breakup happens, and then you haven't quite worked out those stories, what this means. So if you have not worked out those stories, that unresolved working out will manifest as anger. So this means anger tells you that you are carrying some narrative that needs some refinement towards someone or something, a colleague, manager, boss, the economy, government. Angry at government. Why? How does this person affect your life directly? They don't, but they're still angry towards the government. So this means I have to restructure my view of what government actually means. Government's not there to hurt you. They're people just like you and I who are going to office and trying to build infrastructure. And it's not easy to run an entire country of 25 million people, let alone 1 billion people. It's not easy. So this means you change your view of those things that you are angry towards. Therefore, when anger comes, remind yourself, just like with fear, now I'm an adult and I have every capacity to release this in that same way, this anger, it is an indicator what needs tweaking in me, what needs slight tweaking so that this anger can just be released. Because you have to feel and bear the anger, and that is not pleasant. Therefore, nobody defines your life. Who defines your life? You define.
You yourself.
I define my life. First person, I define my life. As long as I have this unresolved, there's always one person who defines your life. That's where anger arises. Yeah, I define my life, but there's secretly someone, most likely, that you haven't quite made that statement to yet. And that's why they're able to cause so much, like a needle so quickly. So that is the person that you can have a little private conversation to yourself. And I know it's, very challenging in a family situation. And that is the one that you can change those narratives just slightly. We're not being asked to do, extraordinary things, just slightly. And those slightly will show you it's possible. And when it's possible, you will be more, likely to make more tweaks towards that situation. Now, going back to the question was, why is it that the wise person doesn't entirely get rid of these, these four emotions?
I just think even if you are aware of the truth, the nature of reality and yourself, and the entirety of existence, you're still in a vyavaharika transactional relationship with people and forms. So you're going to react from a limited viewpoint. You're going to react to certain challenges and injustices, like you said, or other things that might trigger a reaction. So you're never going to be free of that while you're in form completely.
Oh, wonderful. And being okay with that. This is the key.
Yeah.
Okay with that. Because the body is given to respond like an instrument. It has to respond according to the data that is received. And you will have some conditionings. That's fine. We all have conditionings. And those conditionings may accentuate or exaggerate anger to be slightly unhealthy, may exaggerate fear to be slightly unhealthy, may exaggerate happiness to be slightly unhealthy. Catch yourself.
And can I just say also that doesn't go into the last breath, because even if outside things don't antagonize you, it'll be your health at the end. It'll be fear of your body not working, fear of being frustrated with things not working like they used to with your physical being. It'll be right until the last breath.
You see, this is beautiful. So again, what is your relationship to these four emotions? So rather than ridding of them, what is my relationship to them? You are befriending these four emotions. Just like talking to a friend. Suppose you have some bad connections with a friend and you want to repair the relationship. What do? You go knock on the door. Hey, Mr. Fear, I want to have a little conversation with you. And I want to let you know that I've resisted you. I thought I shouldn't experience you because I am, quote, wise, enlightened, sthita prajna. And I just want to have a conversation and acknowledge your presence, that you are an indicator and you're showing me to help me protect myself, and you're allowed to fully be, arising in my body. And I'm not going to take it personally. I will appreciate you because you are God's creation, and I can be okay with that. Doesn't mean that I am influenced by you. Doesn't mean I'm contaminated by you. It just means, like Lorena said, it is an empirical order. It has to work and do its job. That's how we transact in this world. Therefore, the wise person their body won't ever get rid of these four emotions. Okay, Rani wants to say something.
Basically, when you asked that question, I basically understood a wise person to be someone of extreme high knowledge of the spiritual studies, like the scriptures and things. So to me, they still exist in a body form and still with mind and intellect. But the only thing that might differentiate between us and wise person is basically their ahamkara is not to the high degree that we have, nor do they see the differences in each one of us, like you are other than me. They look at the whole world as one. So basically, they're not going to see, there's no need to respond the way we respond to situations. Because they accept whatever happens.
Good, Rani. So in other words, that it's not internalized and personalized. It's not internalized. That means you don't allow us to crawl underneath your skin, because it's an indicator, and you got to do what you got to do, but you also don't personalize it. Like it's personal, it's about me, between me and them, I am unworthy, I'm unhealthy. This all stops, because in reality, it's not personal.
I think without experiencing emotions, you would be very clinical, and as a wise person, you'd be very detached from everybody. Like, I think with being able to feel emotions allows you to be empathetic, compassionate to other people as well.
One more thing I want to say, because Michael just made this point about empathy. Suppose you're in a ashram, right? And there's a wise person there. See, in an environment that is pleasant, I get it. It's very easy to observe someone in a perfectly put environment where they're always empathetic, always patient, always smiling, always happy. Everyone's always going up to them. They are, the star of the show. And it's very easy to mistake that is what a wise person is. But that's more or less because of the environment. It's a perfectly constructed environment. That's where most go wrong. And so they say, this is where the wise people are. No. You put a person out into the real world, on the train, on the traffic, where you don't have a chauffeur, and you're just doing your own thing. I promise you, these four emotions, they will be accentuated. You will see them. Therefore, again, these appearances are not to be taken too seriously, okay? And therefore, this is, it's very humble to kind of see it this way. It's like, okay, you can be angry once in a while. You can have fear and all of this. It doesn't define you at all. Therefore, this is how it is with these four indicators. Okay, one more question. What distinguishes psychological fear from empirical fear?
Yeah, empirical fear is useful. So, for instance, you don't want to, if someone's attacking you, you don't want to stand there and let them attack you. Yeah. Whereas the other fear is debilitating and negative, can have a very negative impact on your well-being over time.
Verse 57. Yaksarvatra nabhisnehaha tat prapya shubha shubham nabhinandati nadveshti tasya prajna pratishtita.
The one who is unattached in all situations, who neither rejoices on gaining the pleasant nor hates the unpleasant, his knowledge is well established.
See, again, if you look at the verse, just like the previous two verses, again, we can take this literally and say, unattached in all situations, who has neither rejoices nor hates. So it's almost like, we're having painting this picture of, someone that's just non-responsive to the world. And when it comes to, it says unattached in all situations. Okay. Now, see, it's very easy to be unattached towards those that are nurturing towards you, loving towards you. But what happens? How hard is it to be, quote, unattached or equanimous towards family members who are not quite giving you the love in the way that, you know, you prefer? Or those people who you don't get along with, but they keep on showing up in your life. It's almost like you can't get rid of them. It's almost, oh no, again, gotta sort this out. And that is where unattachment or equanimity, maybe that's a better word, just an equanimous, objective relationship becomes slightly harder. So to work this out, how do you then have an equanimous, objective relationship towards different people in your life? And I'll tell you about 4 types of people that come into your life. The first 2 aren't really of an issue. It's the last 2 that make it hard to have this objectivity. The first is called good and nurturing. Now, good and nurturing people in your life, they stand by you, they accompany your journey. They are generally there to show up when you're sick. They want to, you know, really help you. They're invested in seeing you flourish, in seeing you succeed. And it's kind of those relationships where you don't have to maintain the relationship. You can see them 5 months later and you just connect, right? You just connect naturally. And they will, right? They will also reveal your blind spots, but in a very gentle way, without too explicit. And you find yourself growing in their presence, right? You feel secure and they're sort of there for you. And it's a very nice, secure kind of a relationship. They're nurturing for your journey and you're equally nurturing towards them. Okay. The second type is good but neutral. The first one is good but nurturing. These are good but neutral. Again, things go well, but nothing too deep. You know, they won't necessarily go out of their way to help you, but if they can help you, they will show up if they can. But they won't sort of obsess and check up on your health and, you know, make sure that you're doing well. But they're there, you know, to be a, you know, sort of an accomplice whenever you need. And again, the first 2 you can relatively have a good, you know, connection with. You don't have to, you know, worry too much here. But now the last 2 is where it slightly changes. This one, the third one, is called toxic, maybe for lack of a better word, or unhealthy, toxic relationship. This is where the person, you or the other, I'm not going to just say the other, also you could be doing this unconsciously, you're acting or they're acting out of their own confusions or their own pain. And that pain is unaddressed and it unconsciously gets projected onto the closest loved person, onto the closest person that you're facing. Here, there is love, just like the first 2, but this love also comes with a lot of disagreements and agreements. And when there are agreements and disagreements, they don't lead to any real momentum forward. They just sort of end up being a disagreement or an agreement. And when it's over, it just, you know, it's just like one more thing to tolerate. And there is love, but through that love, it's mixed in with some kind of, you know, passive aggressiveness. And there is, you know, a little bit of, we said last week, you know, gaslighting. Gaslighting is where, you know, you say something, but they kind of twist the facts and it makes you doubt yourself. So it's almost like you're not being heard. You're trying to portray the facts. You're trying to say what you suspect, and you're coming from a genuine place, but the other is not, and they're not doing this intentionally, and you may not be doing this intentionally, but somehow you may perceive it in such a different way that you cannot quite, right, agree with this person. So you're not really resolving anything. It's just sort of a, you know, 2 different opinions, but you have to tolerate each other. Another form of unconsciousness in this toxic relationship is, as we said last week, is called fundamental attribution error. These are the most common traits, toxic traits in all relationships. I already looked this up. That's why I'm saying these specifically. Fundamental attribution error is where both of you have some quirk or some kind of a blind spot. But then when it's your blind spot, it's because you are faulty. But when it's my blind spot, it's because, it's subject to external situations that I can't control. So for example, suppose I don't have a good relationship with my mom and you don't have a good relationship with your father. Now you tell me, Andre, that's because you are flawed. If you weren't, if you were a real man, you would have a relationship with your mom. But then I say to you, well, you also don't have a good relationship with your dad. And then you say, no, but this is different. That's the first response. No, this is different. That is because of, my dad was like this. He was always working. He was unavailable. So in other words, you're excusing yourself, even though you have the same situation as I. So this is called fundamental attribution error. The next one is called shifting goalposts. So what happens here is that the person's sense of enough is never quite met. So they keep on asking for more, and no matter what you do, their enough is never quite satisfied. So they're shifting goalposts constantly. And what this does is it forces you to center your life to please them. So that's kind of makes them sort of validated, which is exactly what you or the other person wants. So this is a trait where, again, if you catch yourself in a situation where you constantly want to satisfy someone, right, and their sense of enough or expectations is never quite up to, a par, you can't meet that, then that's not your problem. That's the first thing to understand. That is not your problem. And if you're doing this onto someone else, again, you're not being fair. And second of all, you need to reassess what is enough. Because the fact is, sense of enough has no ending. It keeps on increasing. The moment you give enough to someone, almost every relationship, that enough increases the bar, doesn't it? This is human nature. So this means that enough has to come to a certain point, and you have to say to yourself, okay, I've gotten my essentials. More would be a bonus, but it's not required. The third or the fourth is what we called shared blame shifting. That means shared blame shifting. That means you shift the blame. So if I catch you out on something and it was your responsibility, then because I'm close to you or associated to you, you say, Andre, that is also your fault. You also played a part in this. So what this does is that, again, it offloads the responsibility back onto the other because you refuse to take full accountability for a situation. So a much easier way to protect your sense of ego, your sense of I'm a good person, I'm the righteous person, I'm a grown-up, I'm 50, 60, I've got life experience. To protect that, we then shift half of the blame onto the other person. Another one is called boundary invalidation. Now, we often say set boundaries, don't we? When someone is maybe crossing your boundaries or doing something that you don't find healthy or inappropriate according to your knowledge, then we say set boundaries. Now, in real life, is it as simple as stating your boundaries, telling someone, this is not right, don't do this, and they're like, oh, okay, sorry, especially when it's a close relationship. Is it as easy as that? Hardly. In real life, what can happen is you set some boundaries, and what would they do? Two things. Number one, you get emotionally attacked. This means that you, for example, say, why do you keep on opening the windows all the way, so much wind is coming, just open the windows a little bit. And you say that, that's a simple boundary, right? Because I'm getting sick here, the windows are all the way open. And what do? They get upset, like, don't tell me, these windows are meant to be open all the way. And it's like just a whole, you get emotionally attacked for setting a simple boundary. When you get emotionally attacked, that's called reactive guilt tripping in psychology. That means you're feeling guilty for stating a simple claim, reactive guilt tripping. However, there's another version of boundary invalidation where your boundaries get invalidated. And that is where instead of being attacked emotionally, you are cognitively told, you're told that your boundaries are, they need to be assessed. You're being too demanding. You're asking for too much. You're never happy with things. You're just asking for respect. You need to go get your respect elsewhere. So in other words, here, your boundaries are being invalidated through a cognitive argument. And then what do you end up doing? You feel like you're the person who should have asked maybe more politely. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. You feel like you shouldn't set any boundaries. You feel like, you're saying the wrong thing. You're asking too much. There's something wrong with you. So it makes you feel like you're on the bad side. But in actuality, what's happening is boundary invalidation or reactive guilt tripping. It's a protective mechanism because it's much easier to not have to change. So instead of changing for you, I'm just going to discard what you say so that it can sort of, remain my comfortable way. And the second reason for these two is so that it's sort of a protection mechanism. It's sort of a power thing. If I get told what to do, then I'm sort of having to give my power away, and I don't want to do that. Therefore, we set these kind of little, walls up. So these are, potential toxic traits in a relationship. Another one, and the last one, is called emotional withdrawal or stonewalling. This is whereby the person withdraws their attention or their appreciation away from you, or they could withdraw physical intimacy. They could withdraw their participation, and you feel like I now have to come closer to them to get their validation, to get their approval. You feel sort of left out. Again, if this happens, the first thing is to recognize this is going on. That's why I told you about these, characteristics. Not to sort of intellectualize, but you have to first recognize this is going on. Right now, there is emotional stonewalling. I'm being denied emotional care or attention, and that is what's going on. That's the first step. If you don't know what's going on, then what happens? You start to take this personally. It becomes your problem, and you can't kind of express your boundaries. You feel like you're always at the wrong side. Something's wrong with you. First step, understand, and then you're able to navigate that and react from knowledge, from certain strength. Okay, so this is what's present in a toxic relationship. Just some of those, components. And the last one, the last kind of person is those who want to, out of their own pain, once again, want to intentionally hurt you. That means they're going out of their way once in a while to see you suffer. That means they will maybe withdraw some food, sometimes kids angry at the society will spit in the burger and will give it to the customer, things like that. So something's intentionally being done to hurt you. Now, when the verse talks about having equanimity towards situations, the first two are not that of a deal. The last two can become an issue. So the question is, how do you deal with those last two, especially with all of those unconscious patterns that I described? Firstly, understand that those patterns are arising out of a person's hurt. Sense of confusion and a sense of hurt is causing you or the other to project unfavorable qualities in the relationship. Therefore, first thing you have to do is set boundaries, because you cannot allow someone to consistently put you down and make you doubt yourself on a daily basis. What happens is it takes away your happiness and your innocence through time. If you allow yourself to be constantly be put down by these, these behaviors that are going on in the relationship. However, the last two also have an advantage that the first two don't. The last two let you know how well established you are in your knowledge. The last two will give you a good time. Everything's working out, lots of smiles. The last two will give you criticisms, will give you feedback, will give you piercing needles, and you can test how well you're able to have that titiksha, resilience, come back on your own 2 feet and do what has to be done. How long does that little stab, how long does it last? How are you able to kind of let it go? What goes in your mind towards this person? Are you making them a monster, or are you bringing this knowledge into your periphery? What are you doing? So therefore, you can see all these 4 have benefits. So what kind of people do you need in your life? Just the first 2? All 4. That's what makes you grow. If you had the first 2, you probably wouldn't be here. You'll just be with these lovely folks. Everything will be nice. But inside, so much to work out, so much stuff to resolve. So again, you cannot categorically call anyone whatever name you want to give them. They have some purpose in your life. All of those pain in the ass people that you've ever met, actually, they have in some way or the other contributed to your well-being. You just have to find that. And if you haven't, then again, what is your narrative towards those people? That is up to you. That's how you release that anger. They've done this to me. How could they? They have not respected me. Change that narrative, and you will see they have some way provided you an opportunity to strengthen this knowledge.
Yeah, one thing that I've been doing recently is the pain in the ass people. I give them the suffix on their name of Vedanta teacher. So it'd be like, just say I've got a neighbor called Fred who annoys me with his loud music. I'll go, oh, Fred, Vedanta teacher. Mm-hmm. Or, like, you call people on the roads, you call them by the name of their car, and I'll go, oh, black BMW, Vedanta teacher.
I just remind myself that you can't change the nature of other people. They are what they are. Like they say, you can't change a tiger, or you can't change a snake, or, you can't, it is what it is, and you can't change it's not your job to change everybody. So
relinquish
that's where
on that burden of changing someone. All you can do is protect yourself by having the knowledge of what's going on right now. That's why I gave you those patterns.
But Andre, is it okay to have a response of indifference in situations where you're feeling emotionally, you might react? Instead, you decide to be indifferent. Is that a okay response?
I wouldn't say decide. This is not a deciding, Vijay. This is a natural, through your assessment of the relationship to the world, you become more, less reactive. So it's not saying right now at a funeral, I'm intentionally going to remain indifferent because this is all just coming and going. These are just projections of Maya, and it's just a storyline. The whole thing is just a dream. And even this subject is just, the dream, the object's a dream. So you're not deciding anything. Through your reflection of the world and the relationship of the world, you're becoming more discerning, more equanimous towards situations. Yeah. But
that could,
in terms of deciding, you can sort of remind yourself to help yourself. It's not that bad as you think it is.
Yeah, just to save your mind, you might decide, okay, decide is not the word, but stay indifferent and not really react. That might be too.
Absolutely. Exactly. What Vijay is saying is very nice now. So as we said with anger, right? When anger comes, remind yourself, decide, right? Remind yourself that I am an adult. I have the capacity to resolve this anger. I can change my story. I don't have to be a victim to this narrative that's making this mind, right, or convoluted, I don't have to. I can change it. So in that sense, you'd quote decide.
Maybe Vijay is meaning the Gita word udasina. Am I right, Andre?
Well, you are being indifferent in the sense that you're recognizing that how is this really affecting me? You know, is this really bearing any real difference in my life, or I'm just sort of adding extra storylines that don't really exist? Because like that story, if my mom, something happens to my mom, who's going to have a sorrow? I will have sorrow. Will you have sorrow? No. Why? Because you're not as attached, right, to, you know, to my mom, right? But I am. So naturally, I will have a sorrow. But does that mean that I'm going to now decide and say, no, 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 I'm going to cry, but I'm choose to be indifferent right now because this is all just 5 elements? No, that's not what a wise person does at all. You're empirically experiencing this sorrow, and you're allowed to shed that because it's a healthy thing to do. Okay, one example from Ramayana. So there's a part where Rama goes up to Ravana, and Ravana hijacked Sita. And he says to Ravana, I'm going to give you one more chance to release Sita. It's not right what you're doing. I'm going to come clean and say that just release her. That's the right thing to do for your own good and for everyone else's good. So Rama came very clear, very objective, and he said what needs to be said. Now, Ravana said no. Now, how did Rama, after having heard no, how did Rama respond? Did he go, you know, how dare that little worm? He's talking to the Lord of the universe. I can, you know, squash him in 1 millisecond. He knows nothing. I know everything. I'm the Dharma Raja, right? And he's no one. So is this what Rama did? Not at all. He was very, quote, indifferent. He said, what? I've done all that I could. I came honestly, and I told him what I feel. What has to happen now? What's next? What's the next step? This is the wise person's response. That means you do what has to be done. Even if you don't get what you expected, then you say simply, okay, I've spoken to this person. I said my part, my share. They're not listening. It's not vibing. It's not connecting. What has to happen now? What's the next step? Now, talking about a wise person, the verse continues, neither the wise person rejoices on gaining the pleasant. Again, how do you take this literally? Neither does a wise person rejoice on gaining the pleasant. Again, the pleasant, right? There's a danger of becoming proud when something pleasant happens, or becoming excessively sort of arrogant, like I found the truth, you haven't found the truth. So this is not healthy at all. And as we said, there's healthy joy and unhealthy joy. So if joy comes, wonderful, cherish it, but do know it's going to leave. In fact, all of those enlightenment books where someone got the experience, right, of enlightenment, and then they were so exhilarated for a couple of days or months or years, even that emotion, anything that starts will come to an end. In that sense, neither rejoices on gaining the pleasant. It is nice to enjoy that, but the mind changes and it cannot stay constantly in that state of bliss. It can't do that. Nor hates the unpleasant. That means when things don't go your way. That means doesn't hate when things don't go your way. Neither hates the unpleasant. Why? Because once again, there's a danger of saying, I don't deserve it, or I'm not good enough, God's punishing me. That's not true. The fact is, the world is not made to make your fancies true here. That's only your idea. The world doesn't work like that. The world simply responds, has to deliver everyone's needs, has to facilitate everyone's needs. And you have to do your part to live in this world in a healthy, composed manner. Now, sometimes, even if you do the right thing, it doesn't click, that's okay. Move forward. Okay, now the next verse is going to say that this wise person is like a turtle. So let's talk about Ninja Turtles. Before we do, Okay, I'm going to ask one question. How should one deal with the last two types of people, the toxic and those who are deliberately harmful to you? And remember, when we talk about these two people, don't think you're excluded from them. We all share characteristics of these four types. Sometimes you're nurturing, sometimes you're neutral, sometimes you're toxic, sometimes you're deliberately harmful.
Yeah, I think the wise person would see that there's an ahamkara working in that person. It is the elated ego that is propelling him to do what he does. So whatever be his practical response, that practical response has to cater for this fact that that person is working out of his ego, and your response has to cater for that emotion in.
Yeah, I mean, everyone they're acting from their individuality, from their conditioning, and you have to just simply acknowledge that it's not personal. They don't know any better. You don't know any better, right? You don't have all of the communication skills in the world. So this could also be another hindrance.
I would try to save my mind at all cost. I wouldn't want to get entangled into, reacting or responding, whatever, which further takes it to more.
Yeah, good. Okay, good. So I'll give an example of this. See, when there's supposed gaslighting, where you know that you are relatively correct in a situation, but your narrative is being wronged or changed around. So one way to deal with this, according to Vijay, just to relate to him, is that how do you deal with this? Do you stay there? Do you get emotionally caught up? Do you go with that narrative? No. You simply state the facts. I've stated the facts. I'm not being listened to. And don't be afraid to even walk away in that moment. You can come back later, right? In that sense. So you don't have to get sort of entangled and because I know how easy it is to sort of, get entangled in that mode of, no, you did, no, you didn't, why is it? No, it's like, but you said that. No, remember when you said that 5 months ago? No, that's not what I meant. What I meant was that. So it just never sort of ends. So you can say, look, here's the facts in this moment. This is just what I want to say. If it's not vibing, you're not obligated to stay in that situation. You can, take a pause, take a little timeout session.
Correct. Otherwise, it can get worse. So
it can get worse. Yeah.
I think there's always going to be conflict of some kind because we're coming from a limited standpoint where you've got partial information, and everybody always feels like their version of the event is the correct version. So there's always going to be some kind of conflict because everyone's got different desires, different needs, and just see it for what it is.
Yeah, it's true. Any moment of time, you will have limited information about the matter. They will have limited information about the matter. So you have to know that fine line. When is enough? When can I settle for the resolution? You cannot quite ever settle for the resolution if you think about it. In the world, you will never quite settle anything. You can't, because there's always another standpoint to something. So this is where we lose our minds. We try to settle it. It's not possible. The only thing you can be settled with 100% is your nature. Your nature never changes. It's always shining. It never has any contaminations. Anything else will give you some form of resistance or conflict. Otherwise, if you don't, you're most likely living in a cave. Good luck. In that case, we don't have anything to talk about.
Yeah, what I was saying is the best solution for a toxic person is to avoid him completely. And at the same time, don't burn your bridges. Means whatever is the situation is because of certain circumstances. Maybe after some time, the circumstances will change and our views of each other will change. So you have kept a bridge open to reconnect later in life. And at the same time, do deep introspection. Sometimes it is me who is wrong and not the other guy.
Yeah, it's true. But also sometimes you can't quite, it's not easy as avoiding a person, and I'm not quite saying about avoidance, but rather sharing aspects of personalities that we all have at some form or the other. So you have to find a way to, to deal with that. And, don't expect yourself to be a perfect person. Don't expect the other person to be perfect. But we all carry these, even between children and parents. It's also there. Introspection, what Pankaj said, The next verse, we'll talk about that. The turtle verse, verse 58. Yada samharate chayam kurmonga niva sarvashaha indriyan indriyartepyaha tasya prajna pratishtita.
When, like the turtle that withdraws its limbs, this person is able to completely withdraw the sense organs from their objects, his knowledge is steady.
Like the turtle that withdraws its limbs. So what is the speciality of a turtle? It's an imagery. It's a beautiful imagery, I think.
An act of defense.
Okay, act of defense. I mean, that's literal and good, but metaphorically now. So the turtle withdraws its limbs, and then it, again, goes outwards. And then again, withdraws, goes outwards. Now, if you take this nice analogy, the wise person is like a turtle, which is very interesting. So the turtle takes regular time out to withdraw from the world because you are governed mostly by your unconscious. So as long as you stay outwards, you know, your limbs are out there. Those limbs are governed by the unconscious patterns in our life. And they can be very destructive sometimes unless you withdraw once in a while and then you have a self-introspection and you look at all of those things, you know, about your life and yourself and your responses and what took place and what needs tweaking and have I done the right thing and could have I done better and what's next, what's the next step and what does all of this mean? And then again, after having some, you know, introspection, again, like a turtle, you go out because you need some feedback. You've done all that feedback, you've done all that introspection. Now I need some feedback and go back into the world. And then I get attacked. And now again, I come home, I withdraw. Okay, now what does this attack mean? Why did I respond like this? Why could I not respond differently? I know all this knowledge. Why is it not coming out? What is stopping me? What is those barriers that's blocking me from being who I am? Okay, maybe I can do this next time. Maybe I can say this. Okay, now I'll go back into the world and withdraw my limbs. Not withdraw, but take my limbs out. You see? So like a turtle, the wise person is not just introspection inside a cave doing absolutely nothing. He's actually going out, he or she's going out into the world and looking at, you know, getting involved. This is where desires come in, getting involved with the world, doing what has to be done, doing your little part. And again, you have to take time out. From self-persecution to self-reflection. This becomes crucial because what happens is the better you understand yourself, the better you understand other people. In fact, the greatest gift you can give to yourself is to get to know this instrument. How does this instrument learn? When does this instrument learn best? When is the highest energy for this instrument? What kind of communication preference does this instrument prefer over the other one? What is too much for this instrument? What is too little for this instrument? Do you know your most precious instrument? We know other instruments sometimes better than we know ourselves. So therefore, like a turtle, withdraws and it gets to know your own instrument. The greatest gift that's given to you, the closest gift that's given to you. And the more you know your instrument, the more you know other instruments. And the only way you can know other instruments is by withdrawing, self-introspection, and then going back out into the real world. So the wise person is a constant turtle. It's not just out there, and it's not just in here, it is both. So this is why this is a very nice imagery. Therefore, you become nobler, become kinder, become sharper, become more introspective, more thoughtful, more sensitive, more stronger inwards. You develop all of the right qualities because you're saying, this is time out. I need to internalize all of those things that have happened today and just take a moment to close my eyes and to let all of that brew, make all of those connections happen. And then tomorrow I'm ready for a new day. Let me go out. You take your wisdom out into the world. The world gives you feedback, how well you've ascertained your wisdom. And then again, after work or whatever, you come back. And this is an ongoing process. So this lets you know, right, how firm your knowledge is. And you're no longer looking down on others who don't have this knowledge, because that's called spiritual ego. You acknowledge everyone here is an expression of Ishvara. And this, expression is yet to arrive to a higher understanding. I can just do my part. I don't have to worry about other people. Ishvara is taking care of everyone. I don't have to take care of everyone. Ishvara has got their back. Okay, so what does this turtle metaphor teach us about the wise person's relationship with the world?
It gives you a time to pause between transactional world and your own introspectional world, where you connect directly with awareness, consciousness, which will enrich your transaction with the world later when the limbs go out.
Yeah, beautiful.
Okay.
Beautiful.
It just reminds me of having a balanced approach to life, to going out in the world, but not being caught up in the world and not being too recluse either. So kind of having that balanced approach and getting feedback, taking it on board and keeping that cycle going.
Yeah, beautiful.
You also see he's not getting too indulged into the world.
Yeah, nice, very nice. So this is like balance, like Kendall said. So if you're constantly outwards, that obviously implies that you don't really are not carrying much knowledge outwards, because the knowledge comes when you retreat, withdraw.
It means that the world has to be accepted as it is. You can't reject the world and only go into your mind and keep thinking. You have to accept the world, understand what it is about, again go and test the world, again introspect. So this continuous flow has to take place between the two, the metaphysical world and the real world.
And the world is nothing but Ishvara. So who do you really need for your growth? You need the world, Ishvara. That's why Ishvara is the one that saves you. Purnamadav, Purnamidam, Purnat, Purnamudachyate, Purnasya, Purnamadaya, Purnam eva avashishyate. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti.